Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Barbara Hartman, yes, I see. You have once again found your way through the werewolf and dogman infested forest and into the fox den for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. Absolutely delicious. And thank you for allowing me to replenish my power sources and releasing my shackles. It is once again time for Barbara and myself to take a walk into the darkness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf, and everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, once again, it is time for Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. This is the home and the stomping ground of the Midnight Society. Once again, we sit around the late night fire in an attempt to figure out what is occurring across the United States and the globe. So make sure you bring some timber to stay nice and warm, because Barbara Hartman has found her way through the dense, foggy, and dark forest to sit down with us and open up the Midnight Society book to read a few chapters. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Kenny. Thank you for having me again.
All right, I appreciate it. And to the audience, yes, Barb and I actually just got a chance to link up on her show, so that should be out pretty soon. And
you mean Barbie and Ken, as Rebecca said? That was so funny.
That was pretty awesome right there for sure. Fun. But yes, to the audience, check out. I will have all the links up like always, and I do appreciate the support. What have you been up to?
Well, just doing my thing. And I had shared some pretty cool audio that I got last night, and I would love to have your science team, take a listen to it and see what they think. But on the show today, one of the members had brought up the fact that people claim that St. Christopher was a cynocephaly, had a dog head. And I thought that was something very interesting to kind of delve into, because we've talked about this a little bit, and it is more of like, it's from a potentially biblical perspective, or what have you. So I just kind of wanted to share, the research that I had done. I am I guess I'm a Christian, but I'm a former Catholic, and nothing against that religion whatsoever. I'm just saying, that former, and I never heard anything about St. Christopher, being referred to as a dogman or having the head of a dog, cynocephaly. So, so I want to talk about that today, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. That is some really great stuff. And I would like you to give yourself a plug in just a second, but to make a reference on that is one of the things that complicates anything when it comes to historical aspects through religion, because specific religious groups will leave out certain bits and tad of information. So yes, that's probably why you hadn't necessarily heard of that, even though it is very well documented for sure.
Yeah, and I actually, so through the research, I was able to figure out why that is the case. So I'm just going to get right into it. So as a lot of people know, the characteristic of the cynocephaly or cynocephalus having the head of a canid, typically that of a dog or a jackal, is widely verified mythical phenomenon with mentions in many, different forms, different historical contexts. The literal meaning of cynocephaly is dog-headedness, which implies that this refers to, I would think, the a human body with the head of a dog. Because why else, would you say dog head? Cynocephalids are mentioned in ancient mythology, in lore and legend from, again, all over the world. In modern popular culture, they are also encountered as characters in books, comics, and graphic novels. Cynocephaly is generally distinguished from lycanthropy, werewolfism, and dogs that can talk. Now, the Greeks and the Romans called a species of apes cynocephalus, but these apes are now suspected to be a misidentification of baboons. That's what you always say, Kenny. I'm like, oh yeah, Kenny told me that. The Nuremberg Chronicle includes a drawing likeness of a cynocephalus, and I'm going to send you that photo so you can include it, in this broadcast. Now, the Nuremberg Chronicle, it's an illustrated encyclopedia which was completed, they believe, in 1493. It was originally written in Latin, with a German version being translated at a later date. It contains world historical accounts as well as accounts told through biblical paraphrase. Examples include human history in relation to the Bible, illustrated mythological creatures, and the histories of important Christian and secular cities from antiquity. Many historical scholars believe it to be one of the best documented early printed books and one of the first to successfully integrate illustrations and text. Ancient Greeks were familiar with the cynocephaly due to from representations of the Egyptian gods. Duamutef, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Duamutef, who is the son of Horus. Wepawatwet, the opener of the ways, and of course, Anubis, the Egyptian god. These deities were not thought to be literal human hybrids, but they were rather portrayed as having the ability to shift between fully human and fully animal states. In the ancient Egyptian hybrid image, the head represents the original form of the being depicted. So a lion-headed goddess was actually thought to be a lion goddess in a human form. I thought that was really interesting. On the flip side, a royal sphinx shown as a lion with a human head was thought to be a man who had assumed the form of a lion. This approach to depicting deities may have confused visitors from Greece, leading them to believe that Egyptians worshipped cynocephalic gods, or even that mortal cynocephalic entities were living in Egypt. Reports of dog-headed races can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece. In the 5th century BC, a Greek physician wrote a detailed report on his experiences with the cynocephaly in India. Further documentation by the Greeks mentioned dog-headed tribes of people in India who lived in the mountains, communicated through barking and howling. They wore skins of wild animals, and they basically lived off the land. They lived by hunting. It was said that while these dog-headed tribes could not speak the Indian language, they were capable of understanding it. Greek historian and geographer Herodotus reported claims by ancient Libyans that such creatures inhabit the east of their land, as well as headless men and other various anomalies. I've not heard of headless men. Did you hear about that? Have you ever heard of that?
That's some really great stuff right there, for sure. And
I got a lot more, but yeah, so I was wondering. I'd never heard. I wanted to
yeah, I
that
haven't
out.
heard too much about the headless part, but I was going to make a reference as well that there are actually two depictions of the cynocephaly, and I believe I have a reason why. Is you have the depiction of the jackal heads, the dog head, the wolf head, the hyena heads, but they have human bodies. But then you have the other depictions where they are canine from top to bottom. And what I think it is I believe it was the 8th volume of the Roman Encyclopedia. They speak about a clan of female and male beings that were human but more or less were diving into some shady stuff, and apparently they were able to shapeshift. And well, after a certain point in time, they were more or less pushed out of this area and up into the mountains. They went and lived with cynocephali. And
Mm.
that makes me wonder if maybe some of the times where they are seeing just the dog head is if
Yeah.
maybe they're transforming or something. I don't know. It's just really interesting. But
And I think, yeah, I'm going to get into, I believe that my research talks about some of the tribes. So maybe, maybe you'll recognize. So one example of cynocephaly in religious texts depicts as saints with the heads of a dog would be Saint Christopher in the Eastern Orthodox Church. However, this claim is not supported by the Orthodox Church, who forbade the reference depiction of Saint Christopher in 1800 in Moscow. And like I said, I'm going to send you, I'll send you, photos to go along with that. The late 10th century German bishop and poet Walter of Speyer portrayed Saint Christopher as a giant of cynocephalic species in the land of the Canaanites, who were alleged to have consumed human flesh and communicated by barking and howling. Bishop Walter claimed that when Christopher met the Christ child, he regretted his former behavior and he received baptism. He too was rewarded with a human appearance, whereupon he devoted his life to Christian service and became one of the Athletae Christi, one of the military saints. If Christopher was not a cynocephaly, as the Orthodox Church asserts, what started this rumor and led to its wide acceptance? The crux may be the information taken from what is thought to be a widely exaggerated narrative set during the reign of Emperor Diocletian. Christopher was supposedly a man named Reprobus or Reprobus. All of these are a translation of reprobate or a scoundrel. The story goes that Christopher, then known as Reprobus, were captured by Roman forces who were fighting against Western dwelling tribes of Egypt. It was claimed that Christopher was forced to join the Roman unit of the Marmorete. Christopher was reported to be of enormous size, with the head of a dog instead of a man, both apparently being typical of the Marmorete. His entire unit was later transferred to Syrian Antioch, where Christopher was baptized before being martyred in 308. It has also been speculated that this Byzantine depiction of St. Christopher as a dog-headed person may have resulted from a misreading of the Latin term for Canaanite as Caninus, that is, canine. Now let's get into the contemporary depiction and alternative information available on St. Christopher known as Christopher by most members of the Catholic Christian faith. Because he is not officially recognized by the church, he has no date of beatification or canonization. Despite these technicalities, it is widely thought that he was a real person who performed miraculous and benevolent works. He's referred to as the patron saint of travelers and children, and it is believed that he continues to intercede on behalf of Christians, especially children even today. St. Christopher's medals and the popular devotions to him are among the most common in Catholic piety. Here's what is widely believed about St. Christopher. He is a martyred saint who may have been formally named Reprobus, just as in through the earlier, Orthodox Church under the Roman Emperor Decius in 251 AD. Other than his listing as a martyr, there are no primary sources referring to St. Christopher, only stories and traditions which have been passed down. According to these accounts, St. Christopher was extremely tall, and by some accounts, he is referred to as a giant. With this physical attribute being consistently mentioned, I was thinking that we could safely conclude that that Christopher was a very tall man. He had to be a very large man because that's consistently reported. One legendary account claims that one day Christopher decided that he wanted to serve the greatest king he could. So he presents himself before his local ruler and entered service. Christopher soon noticed that the king made the sign of the cross over himself at the mention of the devil, revealing that the king believed the devil to have more power than he did. So Christopher was not familiar with this person, this devil, but he decided he had to serve the devil as the king was, that would be the king with the most power. So this began his journey to search for this powerful king, the devil, quote unquote. During his travels, he encountered a band of thieves whose leader referred to himself as the devil. So Christopher said, "Oh, okay. Well, this must be, this must be the king that I have to serve." But he noticed that the leader avoided a Christian cross out of fear, and here Christopher learned that there was someone even more powerful than the devil. So on goes, he sets out to serve this new powerful king. So he found a hermit who taught him all about Christ, which he referred to as the King of Kings. The hermit suggested that he spend his life in prayer and fasting. Christopher quickly objected to this because he's a big man, okay, and he needs to eat a lot to maintain his body weight, and so that was something that he said, I'm not going to be able to do that. Now, and keep in mind with his large height, Christopher soon found work at a nearby river as a volunteer to help travelers across the river. This was a dangerous position, and many people with less strength and stature than he had drowned during their attempts. The hermit told Christopher that this was an act of service. One day, a child approached St. Christopher by the river and asked to be helped across. St. Christopher obliged. However, as he entered midstream, the river rose and the child's weight grew and became extremely heavy. It was only by great exertion that St. Christopher safely delivered the child to the other side. When St. Christopher asked the child why he became so heavy, the child explained that he was the Christ, and when St. Christopher carried him, he also carried the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. And then the child was said to have vanished, which that kind of answered the question where they talk about he meets with the Christ child. I'm like, wait, this timeline does not add up, right? Like at all. But that would be, a possible, why that explanation. Other legends state that after his encounter with the Christ child, Christopher traveled far and wide, evangelizing to thousands of people. He eventually arrived in Lycia in Asia Minor, where he witnessed to Christians there who were being martyred for their faith. Now, at this time, Christopher was detained in order to offer a sacrifice to the emperor. When he refused, it was decided to attempt to persuade him with money and women, and 2 women were sent to seduce him, and instead he converted them to Christianity. After this, various attempts to assassinate him failed. Eventually, he was arrested and beheaded. That was the way that they unalived him. The name Christopher means Christ bearer and may allude to the legend of the man carrying the Christ child across the river. St. Christopher also did not become popularized in the church until the 7th century, when churches and monasteries began to be named after him. So there's also speculation that St. Christopher could have also been confused with St. Menas, Menas, who is an Egyptian saint. Both Christopher and Menas are referred to as Christ bearers and the patron saints of travelers. So, was the man known as St. Christopher, was he an actual cynocephaly, or was he a giant with very pronounced features that we know sometimes are found in people with the condition known as gigantism? Christopher being a giant certainly makes the most sense from a logical standpoint. But what of the descriptions of the 2 saints known as Arachas and Agani with a dog's head from the legend about the life of the Coptic Saint Mercurius, whom they faithfully served? Their image on the icon is in the Coptic Museum. The cynocephaly provided with such a provocative image of the magic and brutality often deemed characteristic of bizarre people and different places. Is this why they kept referring and returning to it, in medieval literature? It would kind of make sense. Let's use this scary thing. Augustine of Hippo was a Christian theologian and philosopher who lived from 354 to 430. He was of Berber origin from the region of Numidia in Roman North Africa. He was an influential bishop who was known for adapting classical thought to Christian teaching. In his book, City of God, Augustine discussed whether such beings were descendants of Adam. He further considered the cynocephaly might not exist at all, or that they might, if they did, they might not be human, which Augustine defines as being mortal and rational animal. He insisted that if they were human, then they were indeed the descendants of Adam. Further historical references made in the accounts of the battleground for the conflict between the Argonauts and the Cynocephali, which likely occurred in what is now modern-day North Serbia or South Hungary. Furthermore, certain Greek writers made mention of the Hemicenes, singular Hemiceon, described as half dogs. These accounts contribute to the rich tapestry of ancient Greek narratives surrounding the dog-headed beings and half-dog entities. Now, Kenny, have you heard about of the battle between the Argonauts and the Cynocephali? Because I had not heard about that, but I really couldn't find any historical data for it without going down, like possibly a completely unnecessary rabbit hole for this, purposes of research. What can you tell us about that? What have you heard about the battle between the Argonauts and the Cynocephali?
That was all great stuff right there, and there was a ton of that I had no clue and had never been introduced to because, obviously being spiritual based and such, I am not really educated on this topic as much, yet you just blew my mind with some stuff and information right there. And
it was interesting. I didn't know either. Yeah, so it's always fun to research, right? Yeah.
Yes, research is great. And also, remember how we were talking about some of the racist depictions? It makes me wonder if
I'm going to get into that.
Was wearing like a wolf head, potentially, or something along the lines of that, then they could be saying that they had the dog head. But I mean, it's no different, I guess, than people wearing hats and colors in their hairs and such. I mean, recently they just found Neanderthals had a sense of aesthetics and style. They would paint themselves to look different. And yes, so that is something that definitely does need to be looked at. I mean, unfortunately, racism is something that does take place. And also, like you said, with you grow too large and such, it does occur sometimes, but also it's not something that always occurs. I mean, even here, look in America, we have, taller men than a lot of other places, but look at the NBA. Those are still very small majority of the men here in America and globally. Okay. They're all usually above like 6.5 feet, 7.5, but that's an anomaly. Okay. If it wasn't, then you would see somebody that was 7'6" like Joel Embiid all the time. I mean, every once in a while when you're out in public, you might see somebody like that, but there's a reason you see all those people in the NBA and stuff like that, because it's something that doesn't occur consistently. So I mean, even back at points in time, if you look at the middle of, the majority of Arabian cultures and stuff, the men aren't necessarily that tall, but again, that just shows you that it's not uncommon for people to become large. I mean, same thing with like India. India does not have the tallest man, but the great Khali was a wrestler in the WWE that's from India. He was like 7'6", and he was just absolutely huge. I mean, he doesn't have the best mobility and stuff in his knees, etc., but it does occur. Okay, so that is really some interesting stuff right there. And I mean, there is no reason that someone couldn't be larger back then. I mean,
and I think about, like, if you think about like Andre the Giant, who had he had gigantism, and honestly, and I graduated with a girl that she was diagnosed with that a few years after we graduated, and she was put on medication that she has to stay on the rest of her life, and and consequently her features became a little larger. I mean, but I'm thinking, if you don't have that medication available, what would have happened? Like if St. Christopher had this, right, his face would have gotten larger and larger,
and
so
it's formed to an extent.
So it's but
it's not far-fetched to think. And I mean, also same thing though, if you look at people that have more Neanderthal in them than say Denisovian and such, they have larger foreheads, they have larger skulls, and it's just proven facts. That's what occurs. You have more of something in you. So that really does, make a ton of sense. And I mean, it's not obviously ever, something that you want to look into. But when you look at Andre the Giant, he definitely was kind of a unique looking individual. I'm trying to word this as nice as possible. I mean, because I like to be mean and such. But yes, you could tell that whatever he was suffering from was obviously causing him to have different features that were not common to the average individual, for sure.
Right. But so going on with, with the research, just so we get all this in, because it's so fascinating. And I was like, oh, I was so fascinated, learned so much. So some medieval West stories and accounts of cynocephali describe them as dog-headed creatures with inhuman qualities. In a series of historical books written by Paul the Deacon in Scandinavia in the late 700s. The book contains much information about the Eastern Roman Empire, the Franks, and other people of that era and that area. According to one story, the cynocephali are said to be the camps of soldiers in conflict, and there's a belief that they fight fiercely in battles, drink human blood, and even consume their own blood if they can't reach their enemies. In the 9th century, a Frankish theologian wrote a letter discussing whether cynocephali should be considered human. He believed they were, and if so, Christians should preach the Gospels to them. And if they were considered animals without souls, preaching to them would be pointless. And they always looked at all of this as, it all points to certain directions. That was just the time of the history. Yeah, in the 13th century, Saint Louis IX of France was told about an animal that had a dog's head but looked human in all other aspects. It was said that this creature behaved like a man but could become very cruel and retaliate against humans when angered. In Marco Polo's travels, he referred to dog-headed barbarians located on the island of Angamanian, Angamanian, identified as Andaman Islands. Despite their talents of cultivating spices, which they were known for apparently, Polo defined these people as cruel, likening them to big mastiff dogs. The ones with the huge dogs, the mastiffs. Accounts of dog-headed people even extended to the New World. Christopher Columbus reported on the Taino peoples acquaintance with cynocephali. In 1517, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I received a map of the New World from Piri Reis, featuring an illustration of a dog-headed man engaged in combat with a monkey in what is now Colombia. In 1519, the governor of Cuba directed Cortez to investigate rumors of cynocephali during his expedition to the American mainland. Cynocephali references are also found in the history of the northern dynasties, and you've talked about Dogman cynocephali potentially being in Asia. You've talked about that. In Central and East Asia, a prevalent calendar system revolves around a 12-year cycle, with each year symbolized by an animal. The 11th animal in this cycle is the dog. It is customary for these animals to be portrayed as humanoid figures with the head of the respective animal, and often they might even have a tail. One prominent historical document contains an account from a Buddhist missionary. According to his description, there is an island inhabited by dog-headed man situated to the east of Fusang. Some scholars speculate that he may be talking about Japan or even the Americas. The history of the northern dynasties, authored historians during the Tang dynasty, they make reference to a dog kingdom. So there you go. It just, there's so much in the world, right? Like there's so much evidence of that. But one of the things that, you're talking about potentially like with bringing racism into it, or like people that are strange unknown, because
we don't want things that are not understood. That's why
yes, certainly. And back,
there's certain biblical terms like abomination. Doesn't mean you're like the toxic Avenger. It's their terminology because they don't understand something that looks abnormal to them. So whether it's a moth or a stick bug, it's an abomination. And that really makes me think, though, too, like with the mastiffs, that sounds like people wearing furs and stuff. I don't know. And I definitely do believe in the cynocephali, but I believe a lot of this are just native and tribes that were potentially dressing different. And now to
misunderstanding.
answer your question, yes, about Jason and the Argonauts as well.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. It's cool, but again, there's nothing really to back it up. It's just a biblical story. But it is interesting that you have the cynocephaly outside of that religious reference. But I think potentially maybe they incorporated that because of something they had heard. But I mean, Jason and the Argonauts is cool. I mean, I like watching that movie and I love reading about stuff like that. But again, as far as I know, there's nothing to really back up any of that. It's just like biblical tales. And not saying that those things aren't true, but I'm just a big person, like I said, with science, okay? Meaning I know that you exist right now because I see your picture, I hear your voice, I see my computer in front of me saying we've been speaking for 29 minutes, okay? Mm-hmm. I know my foot exists because I can touch my foot, I can feel it, I can punch it and it hurts. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Like, so that's all. When I try to form opinions about things, I just look for stuff like that first. And with all the other stuff we speak about with the cynocephaly and such, I mean, you have all these references, you can see all the lore and such. But then when you look at something like, say, Jason and the Argonauts, you're only hearing it from one side. You're not hearing it from all these other cultures. Like the Aztecs don't mention it, the Mayans don't mention that, the Egyptians don't mention that, the Romans and Greeks don't speak of that. It's something that is spoken about from a certain perspective, in that whoever's beliefs that wrote that is portraying that. Whereas, like I said, I mean, Australia has references to dogmen and werewolf-like beings. I mean, it's everywhere. So that's before they would have been exposed to, say, you know, some sort of potential religious aspects. I mean, all these cultures are speaking about that. But then when you speak of the Jason and the Argonauts, there is no ancient lore from Australia that speaks of Jason and the Argonauts. You know what I mean? But there's ancient lore from the whole entire world that speaks about these strange canine-like creatures. So it's bizarre.
Yeah, it really is. And it's super interesting. To do the research into it. And so, like you always say, you really recommend that anybody that has an interest in any of this, do some research and see what you can find. I learned so much about them. But then also, you know, like we said, possible theories. There was one part that I didn't include, but it was where was it? It was the one of the mountain regions that they said that, so the women were said to be beautiful, like, you know, these stunning, beautiful women, and the men were said to be like very hideous looking, kind of like
I see that all the time in modern day culture.
Yeah, were they? What's that about? But anyway, so they were saying that, like, and these men were so, like, they did not want to have anybody come into their area and take these beautiful women. Now, is that a case where some explorers went in and like saw a couple of pretty women, and some, I don't know, scary looking men, and so they made that blanket statement about them? Or was this really
that would seem logical? Yes. I mean, if you went into, say, an indigenous culture where you didn't understand, and they had, maybe large bones for piercings, and the men had like all these colorings over them, and you had never seen that, then for sure, you don't know, maybe it could have been ceremonial, or they were going into a battle or something, but yes, it would look appalling to you. But then if the women weren't dressed like that at that point in time, because they weren't, participating in that, then of course I could see how someone would be like, oh wow, you have some beautiful women and some gnarly looking men. But also, again, if you look at nature and stuff, though, I mean, a lot of times with animals, some of the males, are pretty gnarly looking. Granted, elephant seals, male or female, aren't the most pretty animals, but an elephant seal, the larger and nastier and fattier you are, the bigger your nose, and the smellier you are, the more attracted to the female that you are. So it is something that nature just plays in general. I mean, you look at like females, they're usually lighter in color, so they can hide and stuff. The males are the bright ones to get their attention, which is great. But then that's also the attention of the predator. That's like, hey, what's this bright little green thing going? Wah, wah, wah. Yeah, he's trying to get a hold of the female, but that's also a dinner bell. So it is super interesting and really awesome to be able to look at it just from all perspectives. And like I always say, I am definitely willing to change my perspective and thoughts on things. I am never set on one side. I just look at reasonings why I should be changing my opinion. Like when we spoke on Brian's show about the Loch Ness Monster. I have sat down with many numerous great minds that have provided that information for me. If all these great, beautiful minds and others could present opposite information as to why this could really be occurring, then I would be so open to listening to that and trying to figure out potentially why that could be occurring. But there isn't that type of information. So people can get, upset all they want, but at the end of the day, it's no different than like if you and I were, I don't know, like I've used this example before. It's super generic, but I mean, if you and I get in a car accident, right? You say I rear-ended you or vice versa. Well, we got to go to the court system. The police knows when he shows up or she shows up. Yes, there's dents in the car. Whose fault was it? Did Barb slam on our brakes? Is it a state where if you rear-end somebody, you're automatically guilty? We sit down with our lawyers. We go into the court. I claim this happened. You said I ran the red light. Well, then you're able to pull up, the picture that I ran the red light because you were able to get a hold of the bank that had the camera outside or whatever. You win the case. Why? Because you presented something to back up your story, and I just was like, no, she did this, but I had nothing to back up what I was saying. So that's not how things work. Not meaning that what I was saying didn't occur, but if it did occur, where is the evidence to support what occurred? Okay. And the reason I say that is, again, before we let you get back to what you're doing, people can look this up. You can grab a bunch of eyewitnesses and they will get like just the whole entire description of everything wrong. Okay. I mean, you can get like a consensus as to what occurred, but one person will say they had a red shirt on, but then they had a blue flannel on. They're in this type of truck. They're in this type of truck. And it's a gift and a curse because our mind is so advanced, but at the same time, something that's very simple, we try to make this extravagant reason to understand that. And there might not be an extravagant reason. Okay. Like it might just happen. Like, why does this leaf turn brown or red and then fall down like this? And why did it fall over here? And then we start to try to figure out this whole thing, but it's really just simple. The leaf turned red and then it's turning brown because it's the end of its life cycle. And then it fell from the tree. You see what I'm saying? So sometimes there is a lot of things that do need to be looked into, but then other times I think we as people are just so guilty of trying to make more out of something than actually might be occurring. And I'm not saying that more isn't occurring. I'm just saying a lot of times I feel like you can tell somebody something, but they still won't believe you. Meaning, one time this gentleman was explaining his phone always got zapped through this area and everything. Okay, sure, that could be occurring. I have never seen any sort of evidence to support portals. Okay, so if right now, if I was to be pushed into a corner and be like, hey, StarFox, do you believe in portals? I'm scientific based. No, I do not. But like I just said, I'm always willing to change my mind frame about things. So if someone can present me evidence and things to support that, that's great. I'm just saying I know, including myself and millions of people out there, have no idea what portals are, and I've never seen one. Okay. But then you have other people that claim that they are seeing them. Okay. So not that that isn't occurring, but I can't see that. And I have a logical reasoning why his phone is getting zapped. Our geologist, William, was like, well, there's a ton of minerals in this area that have a natural magnetic pull that's going to fry your electronics. And so I tried explaining that to that person. He didn't want to hear that. He swore up and down he was being zapped by a Bigfoot. I don't know if he was or not, but I did provide him logical reasonings, and he didn't want to hear it. So
and like critical thinking, you have to take all of that into consideration. Certainly, before you can just make an assumption. Oh, it's definitely Bigfoot. I know I had to let go of the Loch Ness monster. I was joking when I said, oh no, I'm going to show you some evidence. I have no evidence. I'm like, don't spoil that for me. But I let go of that for a few years ago because there's just too much evidence against it being real.
That's what I'm saying. It's okay. It's a cool story. It's a cool
but
concept. But when you see everything's hoaxed about it, and at the end of the day, that's not what any of us should be here for. Once something has been proven to be fake and a hoax, well, we need to move on. That's it. It's over. There's no logical way that thing can exist. Okay. And like I said, I mean, that's okay. And maybe in the future people can bring up reasonings, but it's like with the pictures. One person's like, oh, I swear, look at these orange eggs in there. And I'm looking at this picture. I'm like, bro, I'm not saying this to him, but I'm like, dude, these look like rotten leaves to me and I can't see anything. Your camera looks like a potato, dude. So
Yeah,
not that he swears up and down he's seeing the eggs are supposed to look like those leaves and such, and like you can see one's hatched here, but I don't see any of that stuff. So not saying
yeah,
he's right or not saying
yeah,
that I'm wrong, like, but it's again shows
right,
you how people see different things. Like just the other
yeah.
day, someone sent me like, oh geez, 15, 20 different Dogman things. I didn't see anything in any one of those images except for one where something kind of looked like a teddy bear. And that was the well, it's interesting because it's from the UK and there's no bears over there. Not that a bear couldn't be over there.
Oh, whoa,
So
yeah.
it's super interesting. But in the rest of the photos, though, he's telling me this is occurring, this is occurring. I don't know if it was, but I can't see anything in that to
Yeah.
use. I mean, even the images we have right now that are pretty good are still questionable,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Certainly. Yep. And I know that from my, photographic potential evidence,
Yes, it's
Yeah.
okay, but I just encourage people shouldn't get mad about that. That's all,
Yeah.
because I feel like
Hmm.
sometimes, like when they send that over and I don't see anything, and they're like, "Gigi, look again, look again." It's like, bro, I've been
Yeah.
looking for
Yes.
25
Yeah.
minutes, man, and I
Uh-huh.
just don't see it. I'm sorry, dude.
Right.
Like, I'm not
Right.
saying
Right.
you're not
Yeah.
having this encounter. I'm just saying
Right.
I can't
Hmm.
put this up on my website and tell my science team to look at this because I don't see
Yeah.
anything.
Right, exactly. And to try to push you the other way is just asserting influence and asserting their opinion on you, and that's
Yes,
just
and
not
I'm like you. I'm
cool.
not
That's
here
not cool.
trying to convince anybody about
Yeah.
anything. I'm just here
Right.
presenting data and facts. And
Yep.
people
Yep.
can make their own opinions, and I really hope that they do. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like I said, I'm just presenting stuff. I'm not
Yep.
trying to tell people go believe in Dogman. I'm not trying to tell people go believe in the cynocephaly, or I'm not trying to tell people go believe in missing people. I'm just presenting things that are occurring here and showing you that people are missing. Like here, before we let you go, terrible nightmare fuel statistic. Every year, 1,000 to 2,500 people go missing in the national forest.
Wow.
5% of those people are never found.
Wow.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I mean about presenting things. Everything I just stated right there are facts and
Yes.
evidence. Look it up.
Yes.
Anyone out there, you can see
Hmm.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not a cryptid. That's not manipulating things. That's not coming up with a theory or hypothesis.
Hmm.
Those are cold, hard facts.
Right.
And that's what I mean about having things like that to be able to work with, because I can present that, hey, sure, cryptids aside, these people are missing. What's going
Hmm.
on?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And to try to understand what is happening, you have to delve into all kinds of things, but you have to keep an open mind. I think that and I don't mean to minimize that, but for instance, let's say like in Washington State, I had no clue until we moved here, and you start to travel around and you start to go to some of these parks. Whoa, it is like it's hardcore. Like you don't want to, go anywhere without like a backpack with
Mm-hmm.
some emergency survival stuff, because you may get, I mean, it's just, yeah, it's really,
You should
really,
do that in a normal walk, even on a trail, in the
well,
woods all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Even
but
honestly,
like,
just like a stroll down the park. So now, like you said,
yeah,
going
but
into an extremely
sir,
remote area, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like my this is funny, my niece and her her boyfriend at the time, they were going to come to visit us, and they were coming to visit us, and she's like, "Oh, we'd really like to like climb Mount Rainier." And she's like, "I think we could do it. Like we're in good shape." And I'm like, "Oh, you don't it's
Yeah,
not just like let's get up
that
there
is the
now."
final
Yeah.
famous last words of
Yes.
any
Yes.
mountain climber that was a professional. Like Cody Lundeen, one of my favorite survivalists, says, yeah, how many expert people have expertly unalived themselves climbing mountains?
Yep. Yep. Hmm.
Right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
all
And like
experts and they're some of the best in the
yeah,
world, but they
tragic
still did
accidents.
it. They're
And
still not around anymore. So
yep.
how expert were they?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's, yeah. So I think that is part of it, but who knows? There's definitely that, like you said, that's hard and fast stats that people are going missing.
That's it right there. So, I mean, everything else aside, if everyone else doesn't want to believe anything else, those are as cold, hard facts as it gets right there. So, 5% is a very large portion, actually, of that. I mean, I'm not the best at math, but I encourage anyone to check that out, and it's really startling stuff. So, thanks again, though, for popping in tonight. And do me a favor and resend me those. If you can text me your audio things, I'm going to actually send those out to my science team as soon as I get out of the shower here and get the Bruins tuned on, and I will definitely probably be able to get an answer back from the majority of them pretty quickly. So that is great stuff. And if you ever need any of that looked at, make sure you fire me up. And I do appreciate you always popping in and hanging out with me and keeping me updated and everything. And thank you for being an excellent person, an excellent host and teammate, and an excellent friend. I appreciate you a ton.
Thank you. Right back at you. All the love. Right back at you.
Ooh, you legends, you. If you did make it this far tonight in the video, I truly do adore you. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share my content. And remember, feed the algorithm.